begin, I'll turn your mic on. Do you want me to turn that other mic on too? Are you participating?
I think Travis will do it.
Okay, I got
Okay,
it.
you think okay. Sounds
All
like
right.
Travis.
I am Travis Rawlings. I'm the Educator Licensing Coordinator for the Utah State Board of Education. We've prepared this study session in two parts. Based on the time that we have, we're going to go fairly quickly through the first part and focus on the second. So if you have questions about the first part, please feel free to touch base with me offline. I'm happy to answer any questions. The first part, we just wanted to make sure everyone's aware that all the work that we've been doing is based on your strategic plan. This idea that each student is taught by effective educators who are supported by effective school leaders. And licensing is one of the leverage points that the board has for that. Now, the current system, the reason I have a picture of an iceberg here is because the current system most people think is simple, but it's not. People think it's simple because they think of level 1, level 2, level 3, and that's it, which sounds simple, and it is. But unfortunately, the way licensing works, when you start to dig into the details, there's a lot more to it than that. All of these different bubbles are different licensing types, different licensing paths, all kinds of flexibility, if you will, but as I often say, the term flexibility is synonymous with the term inconsistent, if you think about it. So, first what we're going to look at is a quick timeline of where we started. So very quickly, in August of 2016, after the board had created the APT license to Academic Pathway to Teaching Licensure Pathway, the board created a licensing task force to take a comprehensive look of all of licensing. That group worked for about a year, and then in September 2017, the board directed staff through a motion to seek statutory change to allow for a 3-tier licensing structure based on the licensing task force presentation. So last legislative session, a legislature passes House Bill 40, which codifies, and we're going to have the exact language. And at the same time, the board was working to help move forward with some out-of-state changes and talking about the pedagogical performance assessment. So it was March 2018 when the board approved the amendments that helped make it simpler for people to move from out-of-state to get a Utah license, and then directing the superintendent to create standards for pedagogical assessment. Moving from there, the board then in May of that year for the first time, approved 301. R277-301 is the rule that is the basis of the new licensing system. It was first passed in May. A public hearing was requested and held in July. And then in August, the board accepted the hearing report and referred the rule back to committee. The committee made changes to the rule in September, and then on October, it was back before the full board and was passed. In December, the period for public comment on that rule passed, and so both R277-301 and 303 are both considered to have completed the rulemaking process. They've passed through their public comment period. They are considered in code, if you will, for lack of a better term, but they are not effective until January 1 of 2020. This is the language from statute, just so you are aware. So this is when we were talking about this, the discussions that were had last month. It was ultimately what decision points have been made. Well, this is the one that you can't change. This is the statute that describes the 3-tiered licensing system, the 3 different kinds: associate, professional, LEA specific, and then gives the board the freedom beyond that point. So you have that in board docs. Now, this document this image, is supposed to kind of illustrate where we are in the different rules that we need to revise. And you'll notice that a lot of the rules still have work to be done, but of the major rules, there are a few that we haven't worked on yet, but most of them are in the process moving forward. You'll notice some of those, the dates, February 2019, that's when we're hoping it passes committee, but it actually hasn't passed yet, so that's why it's marked that way. So one of the things, if you have questions, this shows the old rule, the new rule, and the general topic, so that you understand, how the scope of what we're trying to accomplish before January 1, 2020. Okay, so that was the timeline. At this time, we could take very quickly any questions about the timeline. And if not, we'll get into the details.
Question from board members on the timeline. We can still come back.
Sure, absolutely.
Well, please continue.
Okay,
Every
we will.
minute counts. So.
All right. So now we're going to talk about what has been established by 301. Again, this is the rule that you passed and is finalized as of December. You can always bring rules back. Don't forget that. So there are three types of licenses: associate licenses, professional licenses, and LEA specific. When I describe this system to people, I use these terms as a shorthand. Associate simply means someone who is learning to be a teacher. Professional means someone who is a teacher. And LEA specific means an individual who can only practice in a specific LEA, meaning district or charter school. Now, the colors here are important for the next slide, just so you're, or a couple slides down, just so you're aware. So blue is professional, orange is associate, gray is LEA specific. The other thing is that it's important to understand is that in the state of Utah, licenses have a tiered structure. You have licenses, which right now are like level 1, level 2, level 3. You have license areas, which are things such as secondary education, elementary education, special education. Those are considered license areas. And then under license areas, you have endorsements like math, physics, chemistry. That's how the license structure works. And that will continue to work in the new structure. We will still have that. Now, the next slide tries to illustrate how this will look, because the concepts of associate, professional, and LEA specific will permeate down each of the levels, if you will, the license area, and the endorsement. So if you look at this graphic, if you will, so if we put this is a person has a professional license, they have a professional license area, let's say secondary, and then a professional endorsement, say math. So this is a professional secondary math teacher. The associate endorsement that's represented there could represent that the person is a math teacher, but they're currently earning their physics endorsement. So they don't have their professional physics endorsement yet, they're earning it. The LEA specific represents that, well, this teacher is in school XYZ that just needs somebody to teach theater for one period, so they request an LEA specific endorsement, which is valid only in that LEA. And then similarly on the side, associate license area. So perhaps this is someone who's a secondary teacher who is learning to be an administrator. So they have an associate license area in administration. So that's how those two things, the idea of associate, professional, LEA specific, license area, and endorsement, that's how that interacts. That's the vision of what we're trying to accomplish. Now, in the rule that was passed, basically, each of the types of licenses have three types of requirements. This is important because it's going to help frame what we'll be showing you. Each license type has a general requirement section, a content-specific requirement, and a pedagogical requirement. So, if we get into these one at a time, so we're talking about associate. Now, bear in mind, what does associate mean? Who is that person? Who is that person we're looking at? That's a student teacher. That's an ARL candidate. That's an APT candidate. Someone who's learning to be a teacher. Whether they're working or not, they're learning to be a teacher. In order to receive this type of license, they must have these general requirements. They must pass a background check through the state board. They must pass an ethics review, which is, again, something that we run through the state board. And then they have to have some kind of demonstration of academic success. So they must have a degree, be in a degree program, or have a CTE skill certification in areas where degrees don't exist, such as welding or auto repair. Okay. Those are the general requirements. For content, it varies based on the type of license area. For elementary, there is a content elementary test that breaks into 4 different subjects that they have to pass all 4. For secondary, it will require a content test or a major in the subject. This is a change, just so you're aware. Right now, we require the content test regardless. So if I'm going to teach math, I must pass the math test regardless of my degree. This would change and say, well, if your degree is in mathematics, you do not need that test. So that is a change. And then all others, such as special ed, speech-language pathology, school psychologist, all of those would require being in a university-based board program. So there's really only alternative programs for elementary and secondary. And then lastly, for the associate educator license, there are pedagogical requirements. They are minimal because, again, this is the license you get when you're learning to be a teacher. And so the rule requires the superintendent to create and then approve others for use these professional learning modules on those topics. We are starting the process of creating those. Or they have to be in a university-based program. The assumption is that our university-based programs, following the guidance for those programs, would include those topics already. So that's the associate license. That's what I'm learning to be a teacher. Now, to receive my professional license, so this is when someone graduates from their university program. They complete ARL. They complete their APT and go to level 2. When they finish and demonstrate all those skills and knowledge, they have to be recommended by a board-approved program. Whether that is a university or an LEA-based program, they have to be recommended. So it's not something an individual can go off and do on their own, unfortunately. That's just not the way it's set up. They have to be recommended by an approved program or have a license in another jurisdiction. So this is the process by which individuals coming from other states would most likely be applying and receiving a professional educator license. They're not going to come in as associates because they're typically veteran teachers. For content, they're required to demonstrate all the competencies as established by the superintendent. This is in there because the practice has always been that endorsement level requirements are established by the superintendent, not necessarily at the board level. The board focuses on the license areas. These would be right now, these represent coursework, specific coursework and specific content. However, the use of the language in the rules is intentional to say we are moving away from coursework, moving to competencies. That rather than saying take this class, it's you must demonstrate that you know these things. And taking a course is certainly one way to demonstrate competency, but it is not the only way. So that's a content requirement for professional. And then lastly, for pedagogy, they must demonstrate any competencies established by the superintendent. That one may or may not have very specific things, but it's just to encompass, say, methods of teaching, which is truly pedagogy, not content. And then the passage of a pedagogical performance assessment meeting the standards that were required to be established under 502. So this 301 is where that specific requirement lies. And again, that is one of the requirements to receive that professional educator license. And lastly, the LEA-specific license is designed as the release valve, if you will. As staff has been working on this for 4 years or so, we understand the situation that there is no perfect licensing system, that there are always exceptions to every single rule we've ever tried to make. And so the LEA-specific is trying to be the catch-all of that. The board has made it clear to staff that the intention is for individuals to have the associate or professional license. The majority of people should have that, and that the LEA-specific is kind of a fallback in unique situations. As you'll notice there,
Board Member Ellis.
Thank you. I just had a point of clarification. So you referenced that were established in 502. So I'm trying to understand what 502 is because it's not the statute. Are you referring to the old rule?
The current, well, because it's the current rule, R277-502.
I don't see that on your chart.
It's being replaced by 302.
It's right. That's what I'm asking. So 302, not 502. You're talking about the old numbering, which was 502.
Did I say it wrong? Oh,
You
then I
said
said it wrong.
502.
I apologize.
Thank you. I
I'm
just
very
wanted to
sorry. I'm
clarify.
trying to speak quickly, I guess. I was very sorry. One of the things you'll notice on the LEA-specific license is there is very minimal requirements. Because of the unique situations that have occurred, both the licensing task force and then later the board itself realized that we cannot create this perfect licensing system that encompasses everything, so this is where those kind of things fall. You'll notice that these requests have to be approved by the LEA governing board in a public meeting. So it can't simply be requested by the superintendent or charter school director. It must be approved by their local board. The first time it comes up for renewal, it has to then be approved by the state board. And there are also notification requirements. The rule requires that if schools use these types of license, that they publish on their website the numbers of teachers and the types of licenses they hold in order to create that transparency for parents. So that's the really fast version of this presentation. So at this point, I'd be happy to answer any questions, Chair Huntsman.
You made it seem so easy. But that was the Reader's Digest version.
That was
thank
the
you.
Reader's Digest.
Okay, we've got time for some very quick questions. Board Member Davis.
Travis, that was great. I feel out of breath for you over here. Just a quick question on the associate one. Is there a differentiation in contract between the associate and professional? Because there's a portion that says that the teacher can be in a degree program. So are we saying that in my world, that's a substitute teacher until they get a degree and can do an APT or something?
So that's a consequence of abbreviated language. The rule specifically states in a degree, or that they have a degree, or in a program that leads to a degree. And remember, this is the associate. So this is what a student teacher would receive. This would be someone who's completing their degree. If they weren't on a long-term, and one thing I didn't mention on this is a limited time license. They can't have this license forever. They can only have it for 2 years plus 1 year extension. So if I was not in a program, after 3 years, I'm done.
But they could theoretically teach on a contract and go to school at night seeking a bachelor's degree?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. Is that?
Board Member Belknap.
For clarity, you were talking about the pedagogical exam. Why are we creating the modules, and why do we have any opportunity for our teachers to go to a higher education institution and take their pedagogical test rather than us creating our own, or both?
I think you're referring to the associate pedagogy requirements, right? So those learning modules, the rule directs the superintendent to create some so they can be used, but it also requires that other individuals like a higher ed or a district that wanted to create something, they could submit that for approval to meet that requirement. So it allows for both.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Scott Hansen.
Travis, if you could just help me understand how these letters of authorization that we're going to be dealing with tomorrow, how do those fit into this scheme?
So if you remember the slide that has all the complicated bubbles, right?
Yeah.
A letter of authorization right now is considered a temporary emergency credential that lasts for 1 school year to allow an individual to teach. In this new system, those would not exist. There would be LEA specific for this. The purposes that people use for letters of authorization would fall into the bucket, if you will, of LEA specific.
Okay, time bound with the 2 years plus the 1 year extension. And
No, the
Oh,
LEA
sorry.
specific is not time bound. Only that the first renewal has to be approved by the state. So the first time, it's the local board saying we need this person to do it. And by the way, the LEA specific under the new system is 1, 2, or 3 years, whatever the local board requests. And then when it's time to renew, that's when this board would look at it and say, is this reasonable, or is this an abuse of the system, and could deny the renewal, essentially.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, my head's spinning, to be honest with you. As I'm going down, I'm like, now where am I again? What color? So, okay. I have been in dialogue with a lot of the universities and some of the districts about the pedagogical assessment. I would like to further look at that particular rule and really make that the best thing for our educator program as well as for our LEAs. And you were speaking to the fact, Laura, just a minute ago, or all right, that that working in conjunction with our universities for this pedagogical assessment, I'm just hearing this would be a very beneficial thing. And I just want to make sure we have that wording right. So is that 302 that we would need to maybe relook at in licensing?
That would be 301. I
301. Okay, so can I make a recommendation that we refer that back to licensing to make sure, or is that coming back? or-
I'm not certain of the normal procedures.
Okay, so later on I can do that? Okay, I just really, there's a lot of dialogue I've had with professionals, and I think we need to maybe make sure that is exactly what we want. And so I'll make that recommendation at an appropriate time, whenever that is, someone's signal.
We're going to have one more board member comment.
Okay.
And then we're going to thank you for your presentation. Board member Campbell.
Thank you, Travis. I too have some real concerns about the LEA-specific licenses. Currently, we have a report from you about the letters of authorization, and Linda Hansen had pointed out to us last month that we have more than 1,200 underqualified teachers who aren't enrolled in any program. And so now we're tracking those, but under the LEA-specific, we would have none of that information. Is that correct?
We would be able to, the approval by the local governing board still requires a process of reporting to our office for the issuance of the license, so we would still be able to have that information for you.
And so you would intend to report that
Yes.
back
Yes,
to
ma'am.
us? Can I have one more?
One more in. Do you have more?
And then I'm just wondering if LEAs have taken this to heart, and is there any thought about differentiation of pay for teachers who are either professional, associate, or LEA specific? Do you have any information on that?
We have, that has certainly come up in the conversations that we've had with both HR, teachers, principals, but ultimately as a local issue, we really didn't build that into the rule in any way.
Board Member Ellis had something she wanted to squeeze in here.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I missed the part where you were saying we were ending. I apologize. I just had a question. So on the assessment, the standards, I have a letter saying that in the rule, it specifies that the superintendent was supposed to approve that, not the board. I hope that's not used as an excuse to not bring things to the board. I don't think that'd be your intention, but there's a lot of concern over this, so I hope that for clarity that we can make sure there's dialogue about that. But my question on the assessment is the requirement for the videotaping, is that in the standards or is it in 301?
The videotaping aspect is an aspect of the standards for the assessment.
Thank you.
Okay, this will, in the interest of time, and we have another meeting starting here, thank you, Travis, for this part of the study session. I just want to remind board members, as you have other things fresh on your mind as you review the presentation and that, we do have a kind of an internal practice that if a board member has a question, we route it a certain way so we can all benefit from the answer. So on this particular issue, I know I would benefit in knowing what your questions are, what the answers are. So hopefully there's quite a few questions, and hopefully we follow that practice so that we can all benefit from it. So thank you. We'll excuse you this time. Want to invite our USDB folks to come up, superintendent. And we had a break, superintendent, so we're ready to dive right into this. So